Hi everyone. I am here with Reverend Kevin Kittrell Ross, who has been on a mission to inspire and empower everyday people to live extraordinary dreams. He is a celebrated life coach, radio show host, leadership consultant, author, and senior minister and chief executive officer of Unity of Sacramento. He has also served as guest chaplain for the California State Senate, and his nickname is Rev Kev, and he believes all people deserve to live lives of purpose, passion, and prosperity. And he also has shared the stage with luminaries ranging from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, President Nelson Mandela, Ella Gandhi, US Congressman Ami Bera, and Dr. Marian Wright Edelman of the Children's Defense Fund. And one of the reasons that I wanted to speak with you, Rev Kev, is I am completing my ministerial thesis, the Michael B. Bethel School of Ministry, where I've been enrolled. And my thesis is on sacred activism, the intersectionality of motherhood, the political, and the spiritual, which is the waters that I know you swim in because you've been so actively engaged in social justice. So I believe that we all have callings on our soul, right? Themes that propel us. So what led you to being so engaged as a minister? Because I'm just gonna ask you that because I have another follow-up question after that for you.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and thanks for the work that you're doing in terms of your own development and activating your divine nature and finding a way to have this thesis and your ministerial focus be on something that's very relevant as it relates to social change. So I want to just recognize you, Wendy, for what you're up to and how important it is. For me, from the time I was a little boy, I have been inspired by the work and the words and the personal example of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And when I say a little boy, I really do mean a little boy. When I was in elementary school, I took a bookcase and turned it around backwards and created a podium, and literally would practice Dr. King's speeches in my bedroom so that when my friends came over to play with me, before we would play with Hot Wheels and, you know, ride our bikes, they were listening to Martin Luther King Jr. speeches. This is very true. And anybody who knows me, you know, knows this about me. Growing up on Chicago's South Side, I didn't have much proximity to Dr. King, but I grew up in the same neighborhood that President Obama did community organizing. And my grandfather and one of my mentors, and even my father, got a chance to meet with him in those early years of his community organizing. And so there was always this emphasis around me about the importance of making a difference in the community. And so when I was a teenager, I started getting engaged in making a difference in my community, using what I knew and what I had. And what prompted it initially, talking about walking in Dr. King's footsteps, was an intersection in my neighborhood where there was this traffic just flying by. And many of my playmates would get hit, including one day my brother was hit on this dangerous intersection because this traffic coming straight off the expressway straight into our neighborhood was unsafe. And so when my brother got hit on that intersection, I decided that I was going to do something. And it was at that time, for the first time, that I realized that it didn't take a whole big demonstration and protest and and act of God in Congress to make something happen. But as Margaret Mead said, a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens. Yeah. And so what I did was I organized with a friend of mine, Paul Neal, in my neighborhood, a little signature campaign to have a stop sign put at that intersection so that we could walk across the street safely, and that my two brothers, would not be injured. And so we took these signatures, collecting them literally in the rain, to the alderman and turned them in. A few months later, I was coming home from school. I was 16 years old. And the people in the neighborhood had come out of their homes, and they saw me coming home from school with my book bag on my back, and Kevin, come here, quick, come, you gotta see this, you gotta see this. And they took me to the stop sign that had been installed, and everybody knew that I had organized to have this stop sign, which still stands there today at 115th and Forest, 115th and 115th and Forest in Chicago. So it started early. Yeah, it started early for me. And so coupling that with the New Thought teachings about having a philosophy of positive idealism, this began my foray into combining the positive teachings along with social action. And then I would later go to Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, which is Dr. King's alma mater, to really get even further steeped in this work. And real talk, I didn't really know all that meant and what it would be meaning, but I felt that since he was not a contemporary and I couldn't meet him in person, what was the next best thing? And so going to his college and having an opportunity to really understand what informed his ministerial formation. You know, he wasn't the first Morehouse man in his family. His father went to Morehouse, and his father's father went to Morehouse. And so there is a Morehouse tradition and expectation of faith leaders being relevant in taking the values that you are studying, coupled with your calling, and then making sure that society begins to reflect those values. And that was not only the lens through which I was trained, it was the expectation that every graduate would go to work on behalf in leadership of their communities, wherever they found themselves parked. The idea was that you would be a leader wherever you showed up. So this is a part of my early formation. Of course, I can go on, but you may have other questions.
Well, it's so powerful that you're sharing that, because in my research for my thesis, I've studied a lot about Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi, the nonviolence movement, Satyagraha. My father-in-law was a civil rights leader and activist. He was president of CORE in '64 and took Martin Luther King Jr. around Los Angeles, and also Malcolm X. And so we have a family connection to some of this work. And what I learned is that the framework of the civil rights movement was based on religion. It came out of the church. And when I hear you talk about Morehouse, what an amazing mantle to be impressed with, that wherever you go, you are supposed to lead. How incredible.
Yeah. The first words as a freshman on the campus of Morehouse during orientation come from a quote by the former president and Dr. King's chief mentor, Benjamin Elijah Mays, Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays, who said, strive to do what you do so well that no man living, no man dead, and no man yet unborn can do it any better. And over the heads of her students, this is another quote by Howard Thurman, another influence on Dr. King. Over the heads of her students, Morehouse holds a crown and challenges him to grow tall enough to wear it. And so there was always this air of expectancy of a Morehouse man. It is just ingrained in the entire pedagogy there. And so it's hard to not let some of that seep in. You mentioned the Morehouse connection, or the religious tradition out of which civil rights comes from. You know, Howard Thurman, a 1923 graduate of Morehouse and a spiritual mentor to Dr. King and others, he initially met with Mohandas K. Gandhi in India to understand this nonviolence philosophy that he used to liberate India from British rule. He then came back to the United States and taught this and shared this and preached this. And it became the point of connection between him, Mordecai Wyatt Johnson, another Morehouse man, Benjamin Mays, and then Martin Luther King Jr., who would learn of this during his formative years. And that became how it came to the United States. But the reality is that the soul of America is always secured through the faith community. Our moral compass in this country, our sense of right and wrong, our sense of what is highest and best for the totality of society does not come through necessarily the political process or the legal process or the economic community, the business community. It's going to come from faith leadership. That's who helps steer the ship back toward a humanitarian perspective. What is in the highest interest of all? And so when the church, and let me be broader, when communities of faith are doing their jobs correctly, the social ills and diseases are constantly being immunized by an injection of right values, okay? And ensuring that there is a healing balm around all issues that are exclusionary, discriminatory, oppressive, and that would leave others out of our great society. And so this is our role. This is our essential function. We are the helping community, you know, and we help society be better. And what I've noticed is that far too many faith communities feel that they need to steer away from social engagement and social change. And I think that's very problematic and troubling because it's sort of an abandonment of our post. You see, where is that injection of humanitarian values going to come from? You see, and I think that we have a role to play in ensuring that power is always cross-referenced by moral witness.
Yeah. Yes. Well said. I have often sat in an inquiry after witnessing and learning some of the things that I have learned, and just been saddened and moved deeper into my practice of what is mine to do, how may I best serve, how may I bring love to and truth to this situation, where there's such divisiveness and side taking and positionality and oppression and suppression and repression. I love what you're saying. And I, as a minister and a man who I can feel is so compelled by right useness of the law and being an instrument of God, where do you feel the non-violence that Gandhi speaks of, is that effective?
It is absolutely effective. And because it is projecting and modeling for the world the persons that we are being called to be. If we're trying to bring about civility within and among humanity, if we're trying to birth peace within and among humanity, if we're trying to co-create a world that works for all of us, then the means by which we employ to produce that world must be exemplary of the outcome, the world that we're trying to build. And so, yes, to be nonviolent does not mean that one is non-responsive. It does not mean that one is without power. This is what Satyagraha is all about. It's about soul force. It is about this tremendous capacity to muster an inner strength and a courage and a resilience in the face of tremendous opposition. And so, and that modeling, when it's brought together in mass, dwarfs the state-sanctioned models of war and force and mongering, because nothing essentially changes in the state of humanity through means of war. Do you get that?
Oh, yeah.
So we don't become anything more than what we were because we used force to get us there.
Right.
In fact, I think we dig ourselves even further, even more deeply. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the troubling aspect about this very intriguing question around nonviolence. There was a point where Dr. King raised that question himself. So I fear that I've led my people into a burning house using this method. And so I understand that. I understand the point of stepping back and rethinking the method. I understand Malcolm X, by any means necessary, looking at, because the reality is this. The reality is this. The natural human response to someone taking the life of my family is to, in return, do the same. You know, the eye for an eye philosophy. And so there is within the unenlightened self, right, this need to retaliation. The thing is, if you're on a journey toward evolving ourselves as a society, then I can't use the normal means, but I do understand, I perfectly understand the sentiment of a human being seeking immediate satisfaction from an injustice. And yet that means does not evolve the society. And it is a very perplexing place to be in. I don't encourage the literal interpretation of turn the other cheek. I don't think that we should be placing ourselves in harm's way for the sake of martyrdom and sainthood. I'm not suggesting that.
Yeah.
I think that when we're engaged in times like these, our responses should out-strategize our opponents. We should out-strategize them politically. We should out-strategize them economically. I'm talking massive economic sanctions, speaking the language that this present society understands. If you want to get back, right? I'm talking massive voter turnout, the language in which our present capitalistic society understands. And so it doesn't have to be this impotent nonviolence, but a very potent, strategic response that demonstrates our understanding of how to wield the levers of power in our capitalistic society. I think that's the way to go about it, so that we can affect the kind of lasting change that we want to see. And this sometimes takes a great deal of organization and patience and sacrifice. And in some cases, as you well know, generations, you know, of people in a long distance cross country intergenerational relay race, you know. And I think if we go in with that understanding that we will be building cathedrals that we may never get to enter on behalf of a world that we want to bequeath to successive generations, if we have this understanding, then we can gain satisfaction from having done our part.
As you were talking, I was thinking of Howard Thurman, where he talks about, I want to give as good as I get, that tendency, right? That when you referred to that. And I loved what you laid out. That's a game plan on how to render under Caesar what is Caesar's. And what do you do when the legislators don't want to hear? I mean, what more can our work is first done in prayer and meditation, so that we are moved through. We move when we are moved through. And then, you know, Rabbi Heschel talked about praying with our lips and our, I'll say legs because it sounds good, but lips and our feet. And what do you do with the sacred activism or the social justice activism when the legislators close the doors, don't take the calls, and oppress.
Well, Wendy, I want to agree with you that the prayer work is certainly the most important work for the spiritual leader, the sacred practice, the spiritual practice, so that the activist and the activism is coming from a very deeply centered place. This is perhaps the most important word I can give to an activist in these times, that you be rooted in something so centered in you, so certain within you, that the outer reactions of holders of power do not disturb your mission and your vision for the world. In fact, if we're going to do a good read on history, we should know historically, power is not voluntarily handed over, it is demanded. And so we have to prepare for demanding power to yield. That's just the name of it. So there's always going to be a Pharaoh, okay? And there's always going to be a Moses. This is an archetype in the human paradigm in terms of our evolutionary process. There's the Pharaohic consciousness, and there's the Mosaic consciousness, and there's always the discourse socially. But Moses has no power if Moses is not rooted, steeped, grounded in truth, because he does not come with armies. The Mosaic consciousness comes with uncrushable truth.
Yeah,
Pharaoh has force. Mosaic consciousness has truth. Force is temporal. Truth is permanent. But to the one who has not done the work, to the one who is not steeped in truth, he is powerless in the face of force, you see, and forces. So to give you an example related to your question, we had an incident here in California. You know, I live in the state capital, live, work, and worship in the state capital. And so this is an active arena for all sorts of social change agents, from looking for change related to our environment and the environmental policies, to issues around race, women's rights, and everything in between passes through this city. We have a front row seat to it, and there are demonstrations practically every day in this town. That being said, there was a point where we were looking to have a piece of legislation passed. When I say we, the faith community, and on behalf of citizens, on behalf of the best interests of citizens, we were looking to have a piece of legislation passed. I want to say it was related to some type of gun violence. I can't think of the actual thing, because a few years ago. And the governor said, it will take an act of God for me to sign this into law. And so we took that literally as faith leaders, and we bust in hundreds of clergy investments and their congregants, and we went to that state house and went and flooded the lobby of the governor by the hundreds and demanded that he sign it. And of course, he signed it. Awesome. Because there was an act of God. He got his act of God. He just didn't know how it was coming. And so this, when you say if they don't cooperate, if legislatures, if leaders holding power don't cooperate, how do you respond? We respond through organization. We organize ourselves, and we remember the truth, but also our rights as citizens. We have dual residency. You know, we are spiritual citizens. Mm-hmm. We belong to God. We belong to Source. We belong to the eternal realm. But we are residents in this three-dimensional reality, this earth school, this earth plane. And so we have inherent rights mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. being here. But we also have responsibilities appertaining thereunto. And so a part of reassuring those rights is bringing that eternal truth into time and demanding it from those who would withhold it from us. And this is that dynamic, this is that contrast, isn't it? You know, that there's this force over power, constantly that dynamic, and we represent the power, the real power. Right. And we have no examples in history where this is volunteer. And therefore, we who are of the light must bring the light. Hope that helps.
Yeah, yeah, it does. I've been in your state capital, our state capital, 5 times, well, more than that. Mm-hmm. So what does the voice of God inspire in you to do as part of your social activism? By the way, that photo of you, I remember when Michael Beckwith came up to Sacramento, and that photo of you, of the faith leaders facing the police, was extraordinarily moving. That was such a potent photo.
I should tell you the story of that then. Please. Because there's this particular experience that you are referencing is to a moment where members of the Association for Global New Thought were gathered in Sacramento at Unity of Sacramento International Spiritual Center, where I'm the senior minister, for one of our rallies and one of our meetings. And I informed them that as you are coming to Sacramento, you are coming into what I call an active arena, where tremendous activism was still engaged on behalf of Stephon Clark, who was shot and killed in his grandmother's backyard. And at that point, it was 6 months after the shooting, where we had recently received the news. I believe we had recently received the news. No. We had not received the news at that point. But it was 6 months after the shooting. And at this point, the officers had not been charged or, at all. Still today, they haven't been charged.
Just like Breonna Taylor, right?
Mm-hmm. And so the environment was very, very tense. Well, I believe the California Policemen's Association or other decided to have their convention in Sacramento on the 6-month anniversary of the shooting death of Stephon Clark. And on that particular day,
wow,
that event they were going to be having a cookout, a barbecue on that particular day, which it was like smacking, the residents in the face, our citizens in the face. This was not a good move in view of certainly the activist community and many of the citizens. And so we knew that something may happen. Well, the night before the 6-month anniversary was to occur, a sheriff's deputy was killed.
mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. And so our sheriff, Scott Jones, comes on television and says, there's going to be a demonstration tomorrow at let's just say at the police association, the event, that demonstrators were going to go down to protest their presence in our city at this time. And he said, we think that you should go down and show your support for law enforcement. So he basically called for a counter protest. And so you had, responding to this event, these Black Lives Matter demonstrators who are saying to law enforcement, this is not a good move. We don't think you should be here at this particular time. And they were trying to dramatize and bring attention to the fact that justice had not been served in the wake of Stephon Clark.
Mm-hmm.
Was Sheriff Scott Jones's folks showed up at that same demonstration, and most of them were white supremacists. So the morning of this planned demonstration, we get the news, wee hours of the morning, and we're praying all night because there's already a demonstration. So those are big deals. But wee hours of the morning, we get the news that Sheriff Scott Jones has done this. So I come into the meeting with the Association for Global New Thought Leaders and say, as you know, I am going to be, hold on just one moment.
Yeah,
one
sure.
moment. I hear some background noise. Hold that thought.
I'm going to pause.
Okay. So it created this environment where you had, so I go into the meeting with the AGNT leaders. This is the morning of, and I had informed them that I was going to be participating in the demonstration. But the dynamics had changed with the sheriff calling for this counter protest, and so now we got a very intense situation. And so I said to the leaders, I said, listen, let's pray about what's happening in our city right now. But I believe I'm going to need a few more of you to come and join me today, because there will need to be some intervention on behalf of clergy. And clergy leaders hold tremendous respect within the activist community, because our role is not exactly the same as activists. We are there to hold a context of nonviolence, of civility, but also to create a space where citizens can voice their concerns. And so that's what we do. And we're often clothed in our garb and all of that. And so I asked a few of the ministers, I asked all of them to come join me, and a few did, and Reverend Michael was one of them. And so I led them there, took them there with me. And in the moment where I saw this dynamic happening, you had on one side, you had white supremacists, then you had a line of police on bikes, and on the other side, you had Black Lives Matter protesters. And so it was getting intense and shouting back and forth. And so I called the clergy. I said, we need to form a human chain right now. And we're going to stand in the middle of this moment and hold space, that there is peace unfolding in this circumstance. And indeed, it was intense. It was, the fact of the matter is, in these moments, it's very risky, because we're standing in the middle of a public street where this is happening. Traffic is shut down. You have mounted police on horseback. You have officers in riot gear in formation. And you have what could become potentially a very violent situation. That's the scenario. That's the scenario.
In real
and
time.
Of course, now you have law enforcement counting down the moments before they're going to use pepper spray and rubber bullets and come charging in and making arrests. That's what that scenario was. And so we're forming this human chain, and you can just feel the peace start to settle in. And what I mean by that is not that people stopped with voicing their perspective, but everybody kind of knew that this was not going to erupt into violence. So gave some more confidence to lean in more. The police softened their stance a little bit and allowed me to negotiate along with another minister for more time. So I went back and forth in and out of that situation with law enforcement to give more time to the demonstrators, because there were a lot of younger demonstrators there who may not necessarily understand what it means to risk arrest. Okay? If in a situation like that, when you're risking arrest, if you don't understand what it means to do that for a just cause, and but you're filled with passion and fever and fervor, but you may have a DUI under your belt and something else going on, this could be your third strike, but you're so passionate, you may be about to throw yourself in a situation that Rev Kev is not going to experience. If I get arrested, there are lawyers wrapped around that building that's going to pull me out. So we negotiate with the police to give us some time to just make sure that everybody out here understands. And this is why it was so important, as you're pointing out, CORE and other organizations, to do that important training. A lot of these groups that are on the streets today are filled with passion and good intention, but some are not trained on how to do this work in a way that will make sure that they live to see another day to do the work again. And that's a big part of this. And so that moment that you brought up was really one of those moments in my career that was a defining moment, because what was clear to me is if I did not take action to move at the prompting of spirit in the moment, that could have turned to something very different. Every move that I made that particular day was informed by spirit. ask for more clergy. In the moment, have them do a human chain. After that human chain moment where we're escalating and negotiate for more time. Then there was a moment where it was difficult to get the whole group to give up their protests. Okay, they were not ready to, they didn't care that the officers were there. They didn't care that they were escalating tensions. Fine. I said, I need you all then to do a die-in, lay down. Because if they're going to release mounted horses and shoot into a crowd, we need for it to appear that you are they were exercising the most possible violence against American citizens. And this is what nonviolence looks like. It brings out, if there is an appetite for violence, we must show who had the appetite for violence. And so I have them all lay down in the street. Everybody lay down, do a die-in. Because they're escalating, they're revving it up. They're ready to go. They're ready to let the horses come in. They're ready to, and I'm telling you, they're standing there, guns ready. Lay down. And when they laid down, that bought us more time to have the law enforcement to think about what this might look like. Now you've got a group of clergy here, investments, forming a human chain. You have citizens laying peacefully on the ground. Are you going to trample over them with horses to make your point? Are you going to launch bullets and tear gas? What is this, you know? And it gives them pause. And of course, they did not. They did not. And the point was made by the people, and progress ultimately resulted in the passage of AB 392, which is called the Stephon Clark Law, which is the strictest use of force policy in the nation. Changing use of force from the standard, which was for over 100 years. What was the term that they used? Reasonable use of force to necessary use of force. So from reasonable, which meant I made up a reason.
Right.
This is my reason.
Right.
To necessary use of deadly force. And so all of those protests and demonstrations and all that, thousands of people over the course of time, all of those actions led to one law being changed. And it's still not enough, but this is what happens when we come together, led by eternal values.
Yes.
And bringing those values toward bettering our society. This is kind of how it gets translated.
So meaningful what you shared, and that was such a profound exercise in praying with your lips and your feet. When I hear you talk about it, it was just so divinely guided, and you listened. You were in surrender to spirit guiding you.
You absolutely have to be, because in that space, you cannot be led by anger. Anger is a very bad leader, and it makes everyone unsafe. You must be grounded in principle. You must be guided by the larger vision. anger and passion cannot rule. Your greater love for humanity, your greater love for the world at work, this is what you sacrifice for. This is why you kiss your wife. And one of those instances I left home going into a demonstration. And I said to my wife, I feel something. Call the attorney. I just felt it going in. And of course, that was the night, that was the anniversary of Bloody Sunday, where 84 of us were arrested in East Sacramento on a bridge, continuing in our demonstrations. And I felt this was different. So this centering as an activist, as a spiritual leader, as a voice is so, so critical, because that relationship that you're establishing with the source will then show up in how you move and how you're being moved and guided, you know, in these times. Absent that, it can become about being right and headstrong, and you can get yourself and a lot of people hurt, and you can hurt the cause, more importantly.
That's so helpful. Wow. Oh my gosh, I have so much to ask you. Like, oh, so one of my inquiries is sometimes there's like this particular issue that you're talking about, racial equity and racial harmony, is huge on my heart, huge on my heart. And then I have several others. And what about when you're speaking to your congregation? Do you speak about issues that are unpopular, but that you know after spending time in your inner sanctuary are really not okay? Like, do you have a process where you go, yeah, I think that's not, people aren't going to want to hear that, or yeah, how do you handle that?
So for me, the master teacher, Jesus, is my example.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very important to me to move after that example,
Mm-hmm.
the way shower. And the way shower was always speaking to change society, to change the human heart. He was always about that. And he was always relevant.
Yeah.
And he was not very popular in his time, by the way.
Right.
But he was extremely courageous and convicted and moved with that same spirit. And that's the spirit in which I move. I want to always make sure that my relationship, my vertical relationship, is solid, so that whether it's popular or unpopular, I'm speaking as one having authority, one who has been authorized to speak. So I don't speak before I receive spiritual authorization about any topic. So I'm not checking in with my congregation about what I have been sent to speak. Otherwise, what begins to occur with that is that I become a politician. I take a poll, you know, and that's not who I am. I'm a spiritual teacher. I'm from a prophetic tradition. And part of being prophetic, if you will, is being guided by spirit to speak truth into the times so that the society can have a moral compass upon which to make decisions. But if I need to poll my congregation to determine if somebody's going to be upset or want to leave, or, you know, and I understand those dynamics. So what the Spirit has done with me in particular is to let me know to what degree to measure it out for my congregation so that I can bring the maximum number along. Okay. How do we bring them along? The intent is not to be offensive. The intent is to enroll people in the larger vision, the larger action. whatever that is on behalf of society. And so I seek that guidance. You know, there were times when the disciples wanted more. The opposite was, you know, we want more. And the master teacher would say, I have meat to eat that you know not of. This might be a bit much for you to know right now. I'm going to continue to feed you at the level that you have the stomach for. If I told you all about, like, for example, what I just broke down about what activism could look like. You can leave your house and not return. You can leave your house with a good intention and be arrested. You know, if we started out from that perspective, we may have no one showing up, right? You know, so the Spirit has helped me to bring my congregation along in degrees to the point now where I have a very mature congregation and a very proactive congregation on these matters, where they're out before me. They're engaged, you know, so I'm running behind them, but we have to bring them along. And so the role of teacher has been important. And so we've addressed many issues concerning our environment, issues concerning LGBTQ rights, issues concerning Black Lives Matter and the state of race in our nation. You know, issues just all across the spectrum. You know, we have what we call courageous conversations.
Oh, that's great.
Religious plurality. We take it on because we feel that it's important for ministry to be relevant. How relevant are we? So it changes the focus on how many people are in the room to how much impact we're making because of our relevance. So we're measuring our success differently. And the success then brings more people in the room. The impact draws, it's attractive. So it's been, but I do understand those ministers who agonize. Should I talk? And in my earlier years at this congregation, I've been here for 10 years now. When I first started to really have to take on these tough topics, I would, you know, pray all night. You know, should I do it? Should I do it? Oh God, do it. You know, am I about to go blow up my church tomorrow? And I would sit with it all night until I couldn't shake it.
Right.
You know, so I understand that. But I think that is the posture of one who is deeply committed to answering his or her calling. You remain in perpetual state of prayer and checking in and listening and being grounded. When I first arrived at the campus of University of Sacramento, took over my office was the furniture and everything in it was very IBM-ish. You know, I had the big executive desk and file cabinets and all that stuff. And over time, I realized that, yes, I am the spiritual leader and CEO, but I realized that my number one responsibility over time is to remain centered. Period. So I got all that stuff out of there. I put all that in my assistant's office. You take the big executive desk, you take the file cabinets and all this stuff. And when I needed, you know, but my office looks and feels more like a temple. When you come into that place, it is an environment that keeps me perpetually grounded. I'm in my home office right now, which It's not that much far off, but but my office on campus, very much oriented toward my one and chief responsibility, remaining center. Because from that center place, moment by moment, I can provide leadership out of that versus out of reaction. You know, and that's been my secret to lasting in this position. How centered am I?
Love that. What I remember when you were one of the symposium guests for ministerial school, and you came in, and I don't remember exactly the topic, but one of the lasting impressions that you made on a number of us was the fact that you have glass walls, and people can come in and talk to you. And I mean, like that. And that the other thing that we were so impressed by is that when you're about to make, I think it was about a new board member, that you poll the congregation. Like, it's not a decision, unless I misunderstood that, but that you engage the congregation in certain decision-making processes rather than you saying, okay, well, I really like that person. They're great. Okay, will you be on the board? And we were all, well, I can't speak for everybody, but a number of us thought that is such a powerful model for leadership.
Yes.
All of those things.
Yeah, the practice of transparency is what I was referring to in terms of the way my office is situated.
Oh, okay, so you don't really have glass walls.
Yeah, I do.
You do?
So
okay.
what happened when I first arrived there was that my office was, it was just an office. You in order to see into the room, you have to open the door. Everything was opaque. It was solid.
Right.
And so not much light was coming in. So I didn't like that. And so eventually what I did was I took the door. I said, I want you to carve out the door and place glass in it so that a person passing by can look in and see me and I can see them. In the context of COVID-19, we've kind of brought a lot of the activity. Some of my meetings are happening here versus on campus. We have had to limit the amount of activity that we're having on campus at this time. And so so this place starts to get busy at a certain time.
Well, I won't keep you much longer, but I'm so grateful to you. Thank you so much for the pearls that you are just sharing. They're really moving and very helpful. Thank you.
Sure.